Madam Speaker, on Tuesday, the Rules Committee met and reported a rule, House Resolution 377, providing for consideration of H.R. 5 under a closed rule, with 90 minutes of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority members of the Committee on the Judiciary. The resolution also provides for consideration of H.R. 312 under a closed rule with 1 hour of general debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Natural Resources. Lastly, this resolution provides for consideration of H.R. 987 under a structured rule with 90 minutes of general debate, 60 minutes equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Energy and Commerce, and 30 minutes equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Education and Labor. 27 amendments are made in order. Madam Speaker, we're here today to debate the rule for 3 important pieces of legislation, H.R. 987, H.R. 312, and H.R. 5. H.R. 987 is the Strengthening Healthcare and Lowering Prescription Drug Costs Act, a package of several bills, many of them bipartisan, that went through the House Energy and Commerce Committee under regular order. This bill combines 3 key bills to lower drug costs by promoting generic competition, and 4 key bills to strengthen health care, reverse the sabotage of the ACA by this administration with respect to marketing and outreach, and rescind the Trump administration's efforts to promote junk plans that lack the protections of the Affordable Care Act. The American people are justifiably demanding action by Congress to make prescription drugs more affordable. Prices are so high that recent data show 24% of Americans didn't fill a prescription in the past year due to high costs. My constituents have been vocal in demanding action on drug pricing. Patients like Bill, a senior who attends my church with diabetes, parents like Sarah with children who have special health needs. Folks like these need help now. This package would lower costs by banning anti-competitive practices that large drug companies employ to keep generics off the market. This bill will also tackle many of the reasons we've seen enrollment through the Affordable Care Act decline in recent years. Since coming into office, President Trump has cut paid advertising and outreach efforts for healthcare exchanges by 90%. This wanton political decision to cut these efforts is but one part of the administration's attempts to dismantle the Affordable Care Act. Furthermore, a lack of transparency on the part of Health and Human Services around funding levels for outreach, plan enrollment rates, and other vital statistics has created an information vacuum on the performance of the ACA. Greater transparency is required in order for Congress to hold the administration accountable for its efforts to defund education and outreach for the Affordable Care Act. Second, we have H.R. 312, the Mashpee Wampanoag Tribe Reservation Reaffirmation Act. This important bill recognizes and respects the tribal sovereignty of the Mashpee Wampanoag, a tribe that has inhabited New England for over 12,000 years and, in fact, welcomed the Pilgrims to the New World. This legislation has strong bipartisan support in Massachusetts, among other tribal nations, and with tribal allies in Congress. Had President Trump not tweeted about this bill last week, it would have likely passed on suspension and been sent to the Senate for consideration. The members of this tribe cannot wait any longer for recognition, and we need to pass this critical legislation without further delay. Finally, Madam Speaker, this is a week that will be remembered in our history books, because at long last, this body is taking up consideration of the Equality Act. 45 years ago this week, the legendary Congresswoman Bella Asbug introduced the first version of the Equality Act, a bill that will give full legal protections to LGBTQ people all across our country. This version of the Equality Act that we consider today is the result of years of careful legislative drafting and amends existing civil rights laws to provide protections from discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity in key areas of public life: employment, housing, credit, education, public spaces and services, federally funded programs, and jury service. Additionally, the Equality Act updates the public spaces and services covered in current law to include retail stores, services such as banks and legal services, and transportation services. These important updates will strengthen existing protections for everyone. The journey to this final version of the Equality Act was led by a man who is a history maker in his own right, co-chair of the LGBTQ Equality Caucus, and my colleague on Judiciary Committee, Congressman David Cicilline from Rhode Island. Congressman Cicilline worked with lawyers and advocates from the left and the right, religious groups, and myriad civil rights groups to make sure the language of the Equality Act achieved full legal equality while doing nothing to undermine existing civil rights protections for other marginalized groups. The resulting bill is supported by 130 of the largest employers of the country, our largest labor unions, and hundreds of organizations, including, to name just a few, the Leadership Council for Civil and Human Rights, the NAACP, the National Women's Law Center, the Episcopal Church, the Union for Reform Judaism, the United Church of Christ. And most importantly, it is supported by a clear and overwhelming majority of the American people. 71% of Americans support legislation like the Equality Act to protect LGBTQ people against discrimination in employment, housing, and public accommodations. Rarely does Congress have the chance to take up legislation so clearly supported by our constituents. That's probably why, since the day that Congressman Cicilline first introduced this version of the Equality Act in 2015, it has always earned bipartisan support and currently has Republican co-sponsors in both the House and the Senate. The clear majority of both this chamber and the American people recognize that for far too long, LGBTQ people have faced discrimination with no federal legal recourse. It is beyond dispute that LGBTQ people, especially transgender people, and especially transgender women of color, face discrimination across this country. This is a personal issue for me. It's been personal since my baby sister came out to me about 40 years ago. For many people in this country, that is when the fight hits home. It gets personal when someone you love says, "This is who I am," and you know and value that person, and you'll do whatever you can to make sure that your loved one can live life to the fullest, free from hate and discrimination. I'm sad to say my home Commonwealth of Pennsylvania is one of the 30 states that defies the will of its people by not having legal protections for LGBTQ people. The idea that my sister, someone who put her life on the line for our country when she served in the armed forces, could drive across state lines and lose protections is heartbreaking. The Equality Act ends the patchwork of state laws and creates uniform nationwide protections. LGBTQ people won't have to worry that being transferred to another state by their employer or needing to move home to take care of ailing parents will cause them to lose civil rights protections. From sea to shining sea, LGBTQ people will have the security and stability that comes from knowing that if they face discrimination, they have legal recourse. It's also important to note what the Equality Act does not do. The Equality Act does not impinge on religious liberty. Religious liberty is a cornerstone value of our Constitution and our country. Religious organizations are able to prefer their own members and their version of morality in hiring for religious positions such as ministers, rabbis, or school teachers. The Equality Act does nothing to change that. The Equality Act clarifies what has long been held, though, that religious freedom laws do not create an exemption to civil rights laws. Just like a person can't use a claim of religious freedom to refuse to sell a house to an interracial couple, under the Equality Act, LGBTQ families will be protected from discrimination regardless of its motivation. Consider the stakes facing LGBTQ people too often across this country. A same-sex couple walks into a restaurant. They hired a babysitter to look after their young children and are hoping to have a relaxing night out. They're seated and looking at the menu when the manager comes over and tells them they have to leave. They aren't welcome there. This kind of insecurity and humiliation occurs on a daily basis across this country, and in 30 states, the couple would have no legal recourse. Often, humiliation is just the tip of the iceberg. Same-sex couples are far more likely to be denied housing. Qualified and high-performing transgender people are more likely to be fired from their jobs, and LGBTQ young people face rejection, homelessness, and discrimination in school, and denying them an education. These injuries compound and lead to poverty, homelessness, and violence. The impact is felt hardest by transgender women of color who confront racial discrimination, sex discrimination, and gender identity discrimination. The intersection of these forms of discrimination can even be deadly, as it was for Shantae Tucker, a transgender woman of color from Philadelphia who was murdered last fall. The protections provided by the Equality Act give LGBTQ people an equal chance at the American dream. While discrimination and rejection has ended the lives of too many transgender people, many are succeeding despite discrimination. In Pennsylvania, Dr. Rachel Levine, a transgender woman, serves in the governor's cabinet as Secretary for Health. Mara Kiesling, a Pennsylvania native, is the founder and executive director of the National Center for Transgender Equality and a pioneer for civil rights protections. Donica Rehm, the first transgender state legislator, serves in the Virginia House of Delegates. Lala Zanella is fighting violence in New York City. Rafi Friedman Gerspun was the first openly transgender White House staffer. And Miss Major Griffin Gracie, who was at Stonewall, has spent her life fighting to end the over-incarceration of transgender people. The list goes on and on. I'm proud that the House will finally act to provide federal protections to LGBTQ people with passage of the Equality Act. The fight for equal rights is far from over, but I'm proud to be part of a majority that prioritizes equal treatment for all of its citizens, regardless of who they love. Madam Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.